The silence of space was broken only by the hum of ancient machines, barely functioning but holding on to life. It was a sound familiar to General Soren Hayes, one of the leaders of humanity's last great fleet. He awoke in his cryosleep chamber, his body stiff and cold, the sensation of time lost to the void. His mind was foggy, memories slow to return, but the name Lost Fleet was all he could grasp. A name that had once been whispered with pride, now reduced to a forgotten myth. For a long moment, Soren lay still, trying to orient himself. Then the world outside his cryotube began to flicker to life. The hiss of the chamber opening echoed in his ears, and his breath caught as he pushed himself up, nearly falling to the cold metal floor. "Soren, you're awake." A voice cut through his confusion. It was Admiral Leah Tycho, the fleet's strategist and his most trusted ally. Where are we?" Soren's voice cracked, his throat dry from decades of dormancy. Leah, standing in front of a holographic terminal, hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and determination. "We're still out there, in the uncharted sector. The fleet was lost. No one even knew if we survived. I didn't think we'd ever wake up." She looked at the terminal again, tapping it in a series of quick commands. The ship's status flickered on the screen. It was a patchwork of errors and incomplete readings, but it was enough to see the truth. The fleet was alive, but barely. The cryo chambers had worked. The systems had, somehow, revived them. But now they had no idea how much time had passed, or what awaited them. Soren stepped forward, his mind racing as the weight of what had happened started to sink in. The Lost Fleet was humanity's last defense against the alien invasion, a war fought on the edge of the galaxy. The fleet had been sent to confront the enemy at the height of humanity's strength, but they had been overwhelmed. The last thing he remembered was a final desperate assault on the enemy's homeworld. Then, nothing. "How long?" Soren asked, his voice now steady despite the tremor of anxiety in his chest. Leah glanced at the data. "We've been in stasis for centuries. The war is over, but not how we thought. Humanity is not what it was." Soren froze. Centuries. Humanity was supposed to have been the rulers of the stars, building a golden age of peace and prosperity. But this was a future of failure, a future of loss. "What happened?" he whispered, but Leah didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered over the terminal, pressing down on a series of commands that brought up holographic maps of the galaxy. The maps were old, too old, but even then, it was clear. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Alien flags marked every major human colony. The Earth itself was gone. Not even a sign of it remained in the galactic records. "We were defeated," Leah said, her voice strained. "The invaders we fought, they were not the only threat. There's something worse, something that manipulated the entire galaxy. We were never meant to win. And after that war, after we fell, humanity was erased from history." Soren staggered back, his mind spinning. "No, that can't be true. We were betrayed." Leah cut him off sharply, her voice harsh with emotion. "The aliens who destroyed us were pawns. The real enemy has always been hiding, watching us, waiting for us to fall apart." Soren felt his stomach twist. Betrayed? By whom? And if the enemy had been manipulating humanity all along, what were they fighting for? Before he could ask, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "General Hayes. Admiral Tycho. We've got something." A signal coming from a nearby system. A human distress beacon. Soren's eyes locked with Leah's. It could be a trap. It could be a trap set by the aliens or some other force seeking to ensure humanity's complete eradication. But it could also be the first spark of hope they had in centuries. There was no turning back now. "Prepare the fleet," Soren said, voice grim but resolute. "We have to find out who sent that signal. And if it's a trap, we'll make sure it's the last mistake they ever make." As Leah nodded, Soren felt a stirring in his chest. The fire that had once defined him. The fire that had burned through every battle, every victory, every loss, was flickering back to life. Humanity was not done yet. There was still a chance to fight back. And no matter what secrets the universe had hidden, they were going to uncover them. The Lost Fleet was awake, and humanity's war for survival was far from over. The Lost Fleet cut through the silent expanse of space, its darkened hulls illuminated only by distant stars. General Soren Hayes stood at the command center of the Arcadia, his eyes locked on the flickering holographic map before him. The signal they had followed was still several hours away, but Soren couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into something far more dangerous than they anticipated. Leah Tycho, standing beside him, shared the same unease. The fleet had awakened in a galaxy that had moved on without them. Alien civilizations now dominated the space they once conquered. Soren turned to Leah. "What do you make of the signal?" Leah's fingers danced across the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. The coordinates lead to a system deep in the uncharted territories. It's been erased from all modern star charts. The only record we have of it is a scrap from a pre-war logbook. This was a human colony once, but there's no sign of it now. No trace. Nothing. Soren didn't respond immediately. He had been trained for moments like this, sifting through the impossible, making decisions on limited information. But something about the void around them felt different. They weren't simply exploring a forgotten corner of the galaxy. They were searching for something far deeper. Who was sending these signals? And why had they been ignored for centuries? "I don't like it," Soren muttered, more to himself than to Leah. "We don't have a choice. The fleet's already committed," Leah replied, her voice calm but firm. Just then, an officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "General Hayes, Admiral Tycho. We've arrived at the coordinates. No signs of hostile forces, but the system is strange. There are readings, anomalies, everywhere. Set a course for the source of the signal," Soren ordered, his voice steady. "Prepare a recon team. We'll get answers." The fleet entered the system slowly, cautiously, as if the stars themselves were watching. The planets in this system had long since fallen out of the major trade routes. A barren world, orbiting a dying sun, sat at the center. No life, no energy signatures, just the cold remnants of something that had once been. The recon team dropped out of the hangar bay, their small ships gliding silently toward the planet below. Leah stood beside Soren, watching the readings flood in. "It doesn't add up," she muttered. "This planet's surface. There's no reason for a human colony to be here." Soren's eyes narrowed. But they were here. Whoever sent that signal, they're still here. As the ships descended through the atmosphere, the full scope of the situation began to unfold. The planet's surface was a mix of crumbling ruins and ancient structures, long abandoned and forgotten by the galaxy. Yet, as the recon team reached the ground, their scanners detected something strange. An old human outpost buried beneath the ruins. And it wasn't just any outpost, it was still active. The team sent back transmissions, detailing strange occurrences, unexplained energy fluctuations, automated systems still operating despite the planet's abandoned state, and most troubling of all, human life signs. But the readings were faint, almost ghostly. As the recon team entered the facility, their transmission cut out, replaced by static. Soren's heart raced. He knew better than anyone that a lost signal like that was never a good sign. But he could not afford to hesitate. "Prepare a ground assault," he ordered, gripping the console tightly. "We'll bring in reinforcements. If something's out there, we need to find out what." Leah exchanged a look with him, her face hardening. "Are you sure about this? There's something about this place. It's like it's waiting for us." "I don't care. We have no idea what's waiting, but we can't afford to leave it unchecked. Prepare the team." Soren's voice was steel, unwavering. The fleet mobilized. 100 soldiers and engineers descended to the surface, their boots striking the cracked soil with a thud. The planet's air was thin, almost suffocating, but the generals pushed forward, their minds focused on the task ahead. As they reached the heart of the outpost, Soren couldn't shake the sense of dread growing inside him. The building they entered was ancient, its metal walls dented and scarred from some long-forgotten battle. Its halls, though dilapidated, were eerily silent. Yet the systems hummed with life, flickering lights casting long shadows across the walls. The human signatures from the planet's surface readings grew stronger, but still, the voices from the recon team did not return. The deeper they ventured, the darker it grew. In the heart of the outpost, they found the source of the signal, an old sealed command center. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a scene that froze them all in place. Inside, suspended in a cryogenic chamber, were human figures, frozen, their faces twisted in agony, as if they had died in their sleep. There were dozens of them. Leah stepped forward cautiously, her breath shallow. These aren't survivors. They've been here for centuries. Soren's stomach twisted. These were humans, but they weren't the ones they were looking for. They were something worse, a warning. "Get me the ship's log," Soren barked. "Now." As the team scrambled, Leah's eyes lingered on the chamber, a chilling realization creeping up her spine. She turned to Soren, her voice barely a whisper. This colony wasn't abandoned by accident. Whoever did this, they were trying to hide something. And now we found it. The chill in her voice matched the dread that settled in Soren's chest. They hadn't just uncovered the ruins of humanity. They had uncovered the shadows of their past, a dark secret that would haunt them forever. The silence of the planet seemed to swallow them whole, and for the first time since they awoke, Soren felt the weight of the galaxy's true threat closing in. Something much larger, and far more dangerous, had been waiting for them in the dark. The command center of the Arcadia was alive with activity. Officers scrambled to analyze the data from the outpost. The discovery of the cryogenic chambers, the frozen humans, and the strange energy anomalies rattled everyone. The signal they had followed had led them here, but what they found wasn't salvation. It was a message from the past, one laced with danger. General Soren Hayes stood at the center of the room, his gaze fixed on the data streaming in. Leah Tycho joined him, her face pale but resolute. "Whoever left this place behind was trying to hide something," Leah said quietly. "But what if it wasn't just a colony? What if it was a research facility, a weapons lab, or worse?" Soren clenched his jaw. The implications were endless. Whoever had hidden this outpost, and whoever had turned the people inside into frozen husks, had been playing a dangerous game. But there was something even worse lurking beneath the surface, a sense of betrayal. They were supposed to be the defenders of humanity, the shield against an alien threat. But instead, it felt like they had awoken in a galaxy where humanity had been set up to fail. Whatever happened here, it wasn't just an alien invasion. Someone on the inside was working against us, Soren muttered. Leah nodded grimly. "That's what I'm starting to think too. If they were trying to hide something, it's because they knew we would find it. Someone knew we would be coming back." Soren turned away, pacing. The silence of the command center seemed heavier now. His mind was racing. If humanity had been set up for destruction, then everything they had fought for was a lie. But the deeper fear gnawed at him. If humanity's fall had been orchestrated, who had the power to bring the lost fleet back into the fold, and for what purpose? His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp voice of an officer over the intercom. "General Hayes, Admiral Tycho, you need to see this." Soren and Leah rushed to the nearest console. On the screen, an emergency transmission from one of the fleet's scout ships flashed urgently. The signal was garbled, but the message was unmistakable. "We're under attack. The Arcadia is compromised." The transmission cut off abruptly. Soren's heart pounded as he immediately gave orders to lock down the fleet's defenses. "Alert all ships. Ready the fighters. Find out where that transmission came from." Leah's voice was tight with disbelief. "Aboard the Arcadia. How could they?" Soren's mind raced. The The sabotage they had detected earlier, was it more extensive than they realized? Had someone on board the fleet been working against them from the inside, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Someone who knew how to disable their defenses, someone who had planted a traitor among their ranks. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, not just alien invaders, but an insidious force within their own ranks, manipulating the fleet from the shadows. Gather the senior officers in the war room. Now, Soren commanded. We need to identify our enemies before this gets any worse. In the war room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The senior officers of the Lost Fleet, veterans of countless battles, sat around the table, their faces hardened and grim. There was a new sense of urgency in the air, an understanding that the threat they faced was no longer just external. We've traced the attack to the lower levels of the ship, Leah reported. It's not just sabotage. Someone's been feeding the enemy information, someone inside the Arcadia. Soren's eyes swept over the room, locking with each officer in turn. Trust had always been the backbone of their leadership, but now suspicion tainted everything. A traitor was among them, and that betrayal could spell the end of the fleet. Who has access to those lower levels? Soren asked, his voice low. Captain Rhea Vaughn, the fleet's head of security, spoke up. Only a handful of officers and engineers. I've been reviewing the logs, and there's a gap, several hours unaccounted for. It looks like someone tampered with the surveillance systems. So someone on the inside helped them get through the defenses, Leah concluded, her voice sharp. Soren turned to her. How many people have been compromised? Leah's eyes darkened. We don't know, but we're already seeing signs of tampering in the fleet's systems. Communications, weaponry, even the life support. It's like someone's been systematically disabling our ability to fight back. Soren slammed his fist on the table. We're at war with ourselves and the galaxy. If we don't root out this traitor, we'll lose everything. The officers around the table exchanged uneasy glances. There was no easy solution to this kind of insidious betrayal. The enemy wasn't just the aliens they had once fought. It was someone within their own ranks, someone they had trusted. And that made every decision, every move, infinitely more dangerous. We need to act fast, Captain Vaughn said. If they're coordinating with an external enemy, we're already outnumbered. Soren's mind raced. His gut told him that the sabotage on the Arcadia was no coincidence. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. But who? And why? We begin the search immediately, Soren said, his voice cold and calculated. Lock down all key sections of the fleet. Anyone found without authorization will be detained. No one is to leave their posts. We need to find out who's behind this before it's too late. As the officers dispersed to carry out the orders, Soren stood at the table, his mind still reeling from the implications. Their greatest strength, their unity, had been shattered by a hidden enemy. Now, more than ever, he had to keep the fleet together, because if the traitor wasn't stopped soon, there would be nothing left to save. The Lost Fleet was divided, and the galaxy's fate rested on whether Soren and his team could uncover the truth before they were destroyed from within. The tension aboard the Arcadia was palpable. The crew moved through the corridors with a sense of urgency, their eyes darting over their shoulders, wondering if the person walking beside them was a friend or a traitor. Every footstep echoed in the silent hallways. Every whisper felt like a potential threat. General Soren Hayes stood in the center of the command deck, his arms folded, his expression hard. He could feel the weight of the fleet's survival on his shoulders. Time was slipping through his fingers, and with each passing moment, the traitor's grip on the fleet tightened. The initial sweep of the lower decks had yielded nothing. Security protocols had been tightened, and all access points to sensitive areas were now locked down. But the sabotage continued, and with it, the unease. They were running out of options, and Soren knew that soon they would be forced to make a choice, fight a war from within, or lose everything to the hands of a hidden enemy. He turned to Leah Tycho, who stood beside him, scanning the tactical display. The usual calm in her eyes had been replaced by a cold determination. "What are we missing?" he asked, his voice heavy with frustration. The sabotage should have stopped by now. Leah's fingers danced across the console as she toggled through a series of encrypted files. "It's not just the sabotage, Soren. There's something else. I've been running simulations, looking at patterns, and there's one thing I can't ignore. Whoever is behind this has deep knowledge of the fleet's operations, more than just security systems. Whoever is pulling the strings knows how we think, how we react. It's like they're inside our heads." Soren's eyes narrowed. "A sleeper agent. Someone who's been planted here for years." Leah didn't answer immediately, her focus still on the screen. She exhaled sharply, her fingers pausing over the console. "It's possible. But there's more. The sabotage is synchronized. Whoever's doing this is working in a way that seems almost purposeful, as if they're trying to lead us somewhere." "Lead us where?" Soren asked. "Somewhere they can control us," Leah replied quietly. "We've been hunting shadows for too long. This is no longer about stopping isolated attacks. This is an attack on our minds, on our will to fight. Whoever is behind this is trying to break us." Soren's heart sank. It was worse than he had feared. The enemy wasn't just out there, in the depths of space. It was here, in the very heart of the fleet, using their own doubts and fears against them. The realization was like a cold knife in his gut. Their unity had always been their greatest strength, and now it was their greatest vulnerability. As if on cue, the ship's intercom crackled to life. The voice that came through was barely audible, a low murmur at first. Then it sharpened, clearer now. "General Hayes, Admiral Tycho. We've got something. A message from the enemy. A direct transmission. It's for you." Soren and Leah exchanged a glance. This was it. The moment they had both feared and expected. A face-to-face confrontation with their unseen adversary. Soren nodded to Leah, signaling for her to follow him to the communications bay. The room was dimly lit, the hum of equipment and the soft glow of holographic displays filling the air. As they entered, the crew working the consoles fell silent, their eyes flickering nervously between Soren and Leah. A large holographic screen flickered to life before them, and an image of a man appeared. His face was obscured in shadow, but the voice was unmistakable, the voice of someone they both knew. Well, General Hayes, I see you've managed to wake up after all these years," the man said, his tone dripping with mockery. "I must admit, I didn't think you would be so quick to dig into the past. But I suppose I underestimated you." Soren's pulse quickened. He knew that voice. He had heard it before. It belonged to Colonel Damian Cross, one of the fleet's most trusted officers, a man who had vanished without a trace during the final stages of the war. Everyone had assumed he was dead, lost in the final battle. Yet here he was, alive, and speaking to them from the shadows. "Cross." Soren's voice was barely a whisper, filled with disbelief. "How?" Cross chuckled darkly. "How? How else? You think the aliens were the only ones who wanted to see humanity burn? You think the war ended because we were defeated? No, it ended because the truth was buried, and I've spent decades making sure it stays that way. You were never meant to come back. The fleet should have stayed lost, forgotten. But now you've woken up, and now you have a choice." "What choice?" Soren growled, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You're a traitor, Cross. You've been pulling the strings this entire time. What do you want from us?" Cross smiled, but it was a cold, hollow expression. "I want you to make a decision. You can stay here and fight to preserve the shattered remnants of your broken fleet, your broken humanity. Or you can join me. Help me finish what we started all those years ago. The galaxy is ripe for the taking, Soren. All you have to do is accept it." Leah stepped forward, her voice icy. "You've betrayed everyone. You've turned your back on humanity. There's no going back from this. Cross's eyes glinted in the dim light. Oh, I know. But I've already chosen my side. And now, it's your turn. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the room heavy with tension. Soren and Leah stood there, staring at the empty screen. Soren's mind raced. Cross was alive. He had been behind the sabotage, manipulating them from the start. And now he was offering them a choice that, deep down, they both knew would define humanity's future. There was no going back now. They had to find Cross, and they had to stop him before he brought the entire fleet to its knees. The weight of Cross's words hung heavily in the air, suffocating the command center aboard the Arcadia. Soren paced back and forth, his mind grappling with the implications of what had just transpired. Cross was alive, and he had been pulling the strings of their destruction for years. His betrayal cut deeper than anything Soren had imagined. To make matters worse, the man who had once stood beside them, trusted and respected, was now the one pulling the fleet toward chaos. Leah stood silently beside him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold determination. The flames of anger still flickered in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a deeper sense of urgency. Cross's offer was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge that cut to the heart of their mission. What now? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. Soren stopped pacing and turned to face her. We find Cross. We stop him, no matter the cost. If he thinks we'll fold to his demands, he's sorely mistaken. Leah's gaze flickered to the screen where Cross had last been. He's playing with us. He's not just testing our loyalty. He's trying to break us. If he wanted to kill us, he would have done it already. That's exactly what worries me, Soren muttered. He wants something more, something deeper. We need to understand why he's doing this, and what he's been planning all these years. Soren turned to Captain Vaughn, who was standing by the comms console, her expression tense. Have you found anything? Any sign of Cross's location? Vaughn's fingers danced over the console, her eyes scanning through encrypted data at lightning speed. We've been trying to trace the transmission's origin. It's coming from somewhere inside the Arcadia, but it's being rerouted through multiple layers of security. Whoever is helping Cross has done their homework. I'll need more time. Soren's jaw tightened. Time is something we don't have. The longer Cross has control over us, the more chances he has to tear the fleet apart from within. We can't afford to wait. Leah's eyes narrowed. I'm not waiting. I'll take a team down to the lower levels. If Cross is hiding somewhere on this ship, we'll find him. Now. Soren nodded. He had no time to argue with her. He knew Leah's resolve, and he trusted her instincts. Be careful. Whoever's aiding Cross knows this ship better than any of us. Don't trust anyone until we get to the bottom of this. Leah gave him a sharp look, the fire in her eyes unmistakable. I never trust anyone, Soren, but I'll get it done. Leah gathered her team in the ship's lower quarters, one of the most heavily secured parts of the Arcadia. The air was thinned down here, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The deeper they went, the more the sense of unease grew. They were walking into the heart of the beast, into the very den of their unseen enemy. The corridors were quiet, too quiet, and Leah couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, that the walls themselves might be listening. Keep your eyes sharp, Leah said, her voice low but firm. Cross isn't the only one we need to worry about. Whoever's working with him is still out there, and they won't hesitate to strike. Her team nodded, their weapons at the ready, but none of them were knave enough to believe that a firefight would be the real battle. The true threat was the uncertainty. Who could they trust? Was the next officer they passed a potential ally, or another hidden enemy? They'd reached the section of the ship where the transmissions had been coming from. The area was sealed off with multiple layers of security locks, but that didn't stop Leah. With precise movements, she bypassed the locks and led her team inside. What they found was a hidden communications hub, one that hadn't been logged in any of the official ship's systems. It was as if this place had been designed to remain invisible. Holographic interfaces blinked to life as they entered, revealing a series of encrypted files, all marked with Cross's personal insignia. "This is it," Leah whispered. "We found his network." The team began scanning the files, extracting anything that could give them more insight into Cross's plans. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. There were encrypted communications between Cross and external forces, alien factions, mercenary groups, and worst of all, other high-ranking officers within the Arcadia itself. "They've been manipulating our course," one of the tech officers said, his voice trembling as he analyzed the data. "They've been steering us toward the galactic fringes, out of range of any reinforcements, isolating us to make sure we can't fight back." Leah's fists clenched. "We've been bait. All along, we've been walking straight into their trap." But that wasn't the worst of it. As the team uncovered more files, one horrifying truth became clear. Cross had planted his loyalists at every level of command, some of them in positions of power so deep that even Soren hadn't suspected them. The saboteurs were everywhere: officers, engineers, even the medical staff. No one was safe. The team continued to work, extracting as much data as possible, but Leah knew they didn't have long before someone realized what they had uncovered. They needed to act fast. "We need to warn Soren. He has to know the full extent of Cross's plans," Leah said, her voice hard with determination. "And we need to find Cross before he pulls the trigger on whatever his final move is." But as they prepared to leave the communications hub, a sudden blast echoed through the ship, shaking the walls and rattling the floor beneath them. Alarms blared to life, and the red lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow. Leah's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The trap had been set, and now they were in the center of it. The explosion shook the Arcadia to its core. The alarms blared across the entire fleet, red lights flashing in rhythmic pulses that matched the frantic thumping of Leah's heart. She barely had time to react, her instincts kicking in as the blast reverberated through the hallways. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the hum of the ship's engines faltered. The entire ship seemed to groan under the weight of the attack. "Move," Leah barked to her team, snapping them out of their dazed confusion. She motioned toward the exit of the communications hub, knowing they couldn't afford to be caught in the open. The traitors had just made their move, and it wasn't going to stop at sabotage. This was war, and it was happening inside their very ship. Her team followed her down the narrow corridors, their weapons raised, scanning every shadow. The ship's internal comm system crackled, with a voice that Leah immediately recognized. "This is Cross. You should have joined me when you had the chance. The reckoning has begun." Leah's jaw clenched. He was taunting them. He knew they had uncovered his plans, and now he was going to finish what he'd started. Every instinct in her screamed to hunt him down, but she knew better. They needed to get back to Soren. They needed to rally the fleet's remaining loyalists before it was too late. As they navigated through the increasingly chaotic ship, the corridors began to fill with smoke and the sound of distant gunfire. Crew members in the hallway scattered in panic, some of them shouting, others just running for cover. The ship was in full lockdown mode, and the blast had triggered emergency protocols. But in the midst of the disarray, Leah noticed something chilling. Most of the crew were looking to the exits, panicked and confused. Some were too scared to fight back. "Stay focused," Leah ordered, her voice hard and commanding. She didn't have time to process the uncertainty spreading among the crew. There was no room for fear now. There was only survival, and the cost of failure was too high. They reached the central command deck, and Leah's fingers flew over the security console. But the doors refused to open. Someone had locked them down. And then a voice crackled again, this time over the intercom. "General Hayes is probably already dead. It's only a matter of time before the Arcadia is mine. If you still believe in humanity's future, you'll have to find a way to stop me, but I'll make it clear. It's too late to change the outcome. Damn it, Leah hissed. She slammed her fist on the console, frustration bubbling over. She had no way of contacting Soren directly. Not yet. The sabotage had crippled their communication systems, and Cross was methodically cutting off any possibility of coordinated resistance. As Leah paced, thinking furiously, a sudden thought struck her. She turned to her team. The outer hull. Cross's forces must have disabled the main engines by now. If we don't regain control soon, we'll be sitting ducks out here, isolated. We need to get to the engineering bay. The team moved swiftly, retracing their steps through the chaos of the ship. They passed a growing number of dead and wounded, the toll of the traitors' uprising spreading like wildfire. They'd reached the access door to the engineering bay, but it was locked tight. The sabotage had left them with little option but to brute force their way through. Leah ordered one of the technicians to set up the breach, knowing they didn't have much time. But as the door slowly began to give way, the reality of the situation hit her full force. The Arcadia, once their flagship, was now a battlefield. Inside their own ship, they were fighting to stay alive against their own people. The door finally opened, and they rushed into the bay. Inside, sparks flew from exposed circuits, and the lights flickered in a maddening strobe. The engineering team that should have been there to maintain the ship was nowhere to be seen. Instead, they were greeted by silence, an eerie, oppressive quiet that hung heavy in the air. "This isn't good," one of her officers muttered, scanning the room. "The main reactor's offline. And look, those conduits have been rerouted." Cross wasn't just attacking their defenses. He was sabotaging the heart of their fleet. If the reactors were offline, they would have no power to defend themselves, no way to fight back or even flee. Leah's mind raced. They had to restore the reactors, but the task was monumental. The damage done by the traitors wasn't just about disabling the fleet. It was about turning them into nothing more than a drifting target. "Find me the central core," Leah said, determination in her voice. "We're not letting him win this." Her team scattered to work on the damage, but the urgency was overwhelming. Every minute Cross remained unchecked brought them closer to the edge. They could hear the faint echo of distant footsteps, the footfalls of the enemy closing in. Soon, they would be surrounded. In the midst of the chaos, Leah's mind flashed back to the words Cross had spoken. "You should have joined me." What did that mean? Had he really been planning this for all these years? Had he manipulated the Arcadia's entire course from the moment the Lost Fleet had set sail? She couldn't think about that now. The ship's engines needed to be restarted, and they were the only ones left who could do it. They had one shot at getting back control. "Come on," Leah urged, glancing at her team as they worked to restore power. "We've got one chance to stop him. If we don't fix this, we'll never make it out of here." Suddenly, a loud crash came from the doorway. "Ready yourselves," Leah shouted, turning to face the incoming threat. Through the haze of smoke and the flickering lights, figures emerged from the shadows. Traitors, mercenaries, and worse. The final battle for the Arcadia was about to begin. The air in the engineering bay felt suffocating as Leah's team scrambled to restart the reactors. Every second counted now, and she could feel the heat rising in her chest. The situation had spiraled out of control faster than she had anticipated, and Cross's forces were closing in from all sides. She could hear the footsteps getting louder, the unmistakable sound of enemy soldiers in pursuit. "Status report," Leah barked, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of progress. The tech officer, sweat pouring down his face, was working frantically at a control panel. "We've got partial power. Some systems are coming online, but the core's still offline. We need another few minutes to bypass the sabotage." Leah gritted her teeth. "We don't have minutes. If we don't get the reactors up and running now, we're sitting targets. We'll be dead in the water." The sound of boots pounding against the metal floors outside the bay door signaled that the traitors were nearly here. Leah motioned for her team to fall into defensive positions. She knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. Then the door exploded inward with a deafening bang, sending shards of metal flying. A group of heavily armed mercenaries stormed into the room, led by a figure Leah instantly recognized, the cold, calculating face of Captain Ilya Voss. He had once been one of their most trusted officers, a veteran of many successful campaigns. But now his eyes were void of loyalty, replaced by a ruthless determination that made Leah's blood run cold. "I knew you'd try to stop us, Leah," Voss sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "But you're too late. Cross has already won. You're just delaying the inevitable." Leah's grip tightened on her weapon, her pulse quickening as she stood her ground. "You're wrong, Voss. It's not too late. And you're not going to get away with this." Voss laughed darkly, signaling for his men to spread out, securing the perimeter. "You think you can stop me? Us? You're a relic, Leah. The fleet is lost. And soon, humanity will be too." The traitors advanced, closing the gap between them and Leah's team. The flickering lights cast long, distorted shadows across the room as both sides tensed, preparing for the inevitable clash. Leah's mind raced. She had only one shot at this, and it wasn't going to be easy. She turned to the tech officer. "Can you bypass the core's fail-safes and get us full power?" The officer looked at her, panic in his eyes. "It's risky. If we try to force the restart, it could cause a meltdown. We'll lose everything." Leah's voice was a low growl. "Do it. We don't have a choice." The tech officer nodded, his fingers flying across the control panel as he worked to override the security systems. Meanwhile, Leah signaled to her team to prepare for the fight of their lives. "We're going to buy him enough time to finish the job," Leah said, her voice filled with grim resolve. "We'll hold them off until the core is back online. Then we get out of here, and we end this once and for all." Gunfire erupted, shattering the tense silence that had settled over the room. The first volley came from Voss's men, but Leah's team was ready. Blaster fire lit up the dark room, and the sharp reports of weapons echoed in the confined space. The mercenaries pressed forward, but Leah's team held their ground, pushing back with precision and determination. Each shot fired was an act of defiance, a refusal to let Cross have his way. Voss was still standing in the middle of the room, watching the chaos unfold with a twisted smirk. But Leah's eyes were focused on him now. He was the key. She couldn't let him get any closer to the core. She had to take him out before it was too late. Leah moved quickly, using the smoke and debris for cover as she advanced on Voss. The sound of blaster fire continued to fill the air, but her attention was fixed solely on him. He hadn't seen her yet. He was too busy barking orders at his men, confident in his control over the situation. But Leah wasn't about to let him have that control. With a swift motion, she dove forward, rolling into position behind a large piece of machinery. Voss was only a few meters away now, his back turned. It was the opening she needed. "Voss," Leah shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Voss spun around just in time to see her emerging from cover. His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But it was too late. Leah fired a precise shot, aimed directly at his chest. He staggered backward, the blast knocking him off his feet. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Voss hit the ground hard, his body twitching as the blast's energy coursed through him. But even as he fell, he managed a final, venomous grin. "You think you've won," he gasped, his voice filled with disbelief. "You've only delayed the inevitable. Cross will finish what he started." Leah's heart pounded as she moved quickly toward him, taking his weapon from the floor. She didn't have time for more words. She couldn't let Cross's words fester in her mind. She had a mission, and that mission was to stop the chaos before it spread any further. Behind her, the sound of the reactor systems powering up echoed through the room. The hum of energy returned, and the lights flickered back to life. It wasn't a full restoration yet, but it was enough. Leah looked over her shoulder and saw the technician nodding, his hands trembling as he worked. "We're getting there," the officer said. "It's almost done." Leah turned back to Voss, who was struggling to rise. His men were regrouping, but they had lost their leader. It was time to end this fight, for good. The ship was alive again. The hum of the engines reverberated through the walls, a steady reminder that they had won their first battle. But the war was far from over. Leah could feel the tension draining from her body, the weight of their victory sinking in. Voss lay motionless on the floor, his life fading as quickly as his plans had. His death marked the end of a significant piece of Cross's network within the Arcadia, but it also meant the fight was far from over. There were still loyalists and mercenaries scattered throughout the ship, and Cross himself was still out there, waiting for his moment. Leah took a deep breath, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The battle was not won yet. There was only one priority left: Cross. She turned to her team. "Get the ship secured," she ordered. "We'll need to clean up the mess in the lower decks, but we don't have the luxury of rest. Cross will have expected us to act quickly, and he's already one step ahead." One of the soldiers nodded and began issuing commands to the team, directing them toward various sections of the ship to ensure no other surprises awaited them. Leah watched as they moved, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. The tech officer was still working on the core, and she knew she couldn't afford to wait. They had to track down Cross now, before he could regroup and make his final move. Leah moved swiftly to the comms panel, checking the latest data feeds. The fleet was in disarray. Communications were still down in several sectors, and many of the systems remained compromised. Cross's sabotage had been more widespread than they had initially thought, but now that the core was back online, they had power. They could fight. She keyed in the emergency fleet-wide frequency and sent a message to Soren, hoping it would reach him. "General Hayes, we've neutralized Voss. The reactor's online again. We need your location. Cross is still out there." The reply came almost immediately, crackling with static, but Soren's voice was unmistakable. "Leah, thank the stars you're alive. We're headed for the bridge. Cross took control of the ship's command systems. He's locked us out of every exit. We need you to meet us at the central control room. It's time to end this." Leah's heart quickened at the urgency in Soren's voice. They were all fighting on the same front now. The Arcadia would not fall to Cross, and humanity would not be abandoned. She could feel the resolve solidifying in her chest. "Understood," Leah said firmly. "We're on our way." She turned to the technician, who was wiping sweat from his brow. "Can you secure the core's integrity from here?" He nodded, though his expression was still strained. "I've isolated the damage, but the integrity of the rest of the systems will take time. I'll keep working on it, but the priority is Cross. You're right. He's not going to let this slip." "Good. Get to the control room when you can," Leah instructed, then turned to her team. "Everyone on me. We're making our way to the bridge. It's now or never." The team moved in quick, coordinated steps. They'd trained for moments like this, but there was no substitute for the real thing. Leah could sense the urgency in the air, the mounting pressure as they navigated through the labyrinth of hallways toward the command center. As they neared the bridge, the lights grew dimmer, and the sounds of the ship's systems going into emergency shutdown rang through the hallways. Cross had triggered a secondary lockdown, hoping to trap them all in one place. The hallways were eerily quiet, too quiet. Leah reached the bridge door and stopped, raising a hand to signal for her team to hold position. She could hear movement inside. Cross was close. "Ready yourselves," she whispered, her voice low. "We take him down fast." With a nod from her team, Leah took the lead, forcing open the door. The moment they stepped onto the bridge, they were met with the sight of Cross standing calmly at the control panel, his back to them, as if he were in complete control. "Ah, General Hayes's loyal dog," Cross said coolly, without turning. "You've come to stop me. How quaint." Leah's fingers tightened on her weapon, but she kept her voice steady. "This ends now, Cross. You've betrayed humanity, and we won't let you destroy everything we fought for." Cross chuckled, the sound cold and mocking. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. The galaxy is changing, Leah. I am its future." "No," Leah snapped. "You're just a traitor who's about to learn that humanity doesn't bow to anyone." In one fluid motion, she fired. The shot struck Cross in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. His eyes burned with fury, but there was an undeniable look of surprise in them. "You think this is over?" Cross gasped, his voice filled with venom. "You'll never understand the game I've been playing. You're too blind to see the truth." Leah took a step forward, her weapon aimed directly at his head. "The truth is simple. You lost. Humanity won. And the Arcadia is going to see the stars again." With a final, cold glance at Cross, Leah pulled the trigger. His body went still, and the bridge fell silent. As the tension lifted, Leah felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in days. Cross was dead, and his reign of terror had ended. They had done it. They had saved the fleet. Humanity would stand once again, unbroken. Soren's voice crackled through the comms, triumphant. "Leah, it's over. We're taking back control of the fleet. Let's get to work." And with that, the dawn of humanity's true victory began to rise.